Hello, my name is Nathan Carrillo, and my philosopher of choice is Adam Smith. Now, before we get into specifics, I have a quick fun fact about Adam Smith. He did not like getting portraits of himself. I looked online, and there was only two portraits of himself, and I saw how he really did not like to see himself in portraits, and the physical depictions and portraits of himself were mostly created from memory, and people during his time described him as having a large nose, bulging eyes, a protruding lower lip, a nervous twitch, and a speech impediment. Now let's move on. Now, here's a brief overview of the Adam Smith. First, we're going to be talking about the background information, where he grew up, where he went to school. Then, we're going to be talking about key principles and core beliefs of Adam Smith. Then, the ethical and political applications of his beliefs. Then, his central criticisms, final takeaways and insights, and finally, the conclusion. Smith was born in the 18th century in Kirkcaldy, United Kingdom in Scotland. Now, the exact date was June 5th, 1723, in Scotland, and he was raised by a single mother because his father had unfortunately passed 2 months before he was born. Adam Smith has been famously known as a father of economics. His love for liberty, free will, and reason had developed when he studied moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow, and he had studied his postgraduate at Oxford University. Then, after he had graduated, he had went on to organize public lectures at the University of Edinburgh, and he had wrote two classic works during his lifetime, one of them being The Theory of Moral Sentiments and inquiry, and the other one being an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of the nation, that both of them revolved around economics and its connection to his moral philosophy. Also, he did collaborate with the Scottish philosopher David Hume during the Scottish Enlightenment. Now, let's move on to Smith's key principles and his core beliefs. Smith had formed many philosophical applications to economics and politics. He believed in free markets, limited government, and free market taxation. He was an egalitarian, and egalitarians practice the principle that all people are created equal and deserve the same rights and opportunities. Smith had also believed in education for all. In his life, he also devised the idea of the invisible hand, which guided the forces of supply and demand, according to Smith. He had believed that if everybody looked out for themselves, it would eventually help all in society, and he proposed this as self-interest. He had principled that self-interest was a moral foundation and is classified in the virtue of classic liberal tradition, the virtue of prudence. He was also an outlier who supported the plan of the development of civilizations through economic strategy, which he had implied in his two works. Smith highlights his idea of self-interest in this quote: "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." Now, through the main branches of philosophy, Adam Smith mostly highlighted two branches throughout his lifetime. One of them was political philosophy, and the other one was ethics, and you can see them highlighted in orange in this funnel. Now, let's move on to how he applies political philosophy and ethics. Throughout his lifetime, he had specifically highlighted these subfields of philosophy in his two works, one of them being The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and the second one being an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of the nation. And these two works had revolved around the themes of ethics, political power, and his economic ideals and proposed economic ideals. One of them being the invisible hand, and how self-interest has inevitably leading to the improvement of society. And he also reflected morally through his moral principles that everyone should have the right to pursue the liberal plan of equality, liberty, and justice in their daily lives. Now let's move on to central criticisms about Adam Smith's beliefs and philosophies. He had also faced criticisms from the 18th century Swiss philosopher Rousseau, who argued that economic freedom and self interest, which Smith had proposed, were the corruption of progress and commerce. Also, Adam Smith was heavily criticized during his time because most of his views, which are considered normal now, were considered radical during his time. For example, he wanted education for all in a time where education was only for the rich. He opposed slavery, he opposed imperialism, and he criticized the British monarchy, which had led to a lot of criticism. Also, his idea of self interest can sometimes be indistinguishable to selfishness and keeping the wealth or gains to oneself, which can lead to a cruel or narcissistic society. Now, I have a question. Although Smith's idea of self interest works in theory, can it be applied equally to the behavior of normal society? Can this path of self interest lead to tranquility or chaos? What do you think? Now, finally, we should move on to the final takeaways and insights of Adam Smith. Adam Smith highlighted self interest, egalitarianism, and economics in his lifetime and moves on to his legacy. For self interest, Smith believed that self interest to oneself leads to the betterment of society through the collective work enforced to achieve one's self interest. Through his egalitarianism, Smith's moral principles concerned equality, liberty, and justice for all, and he had also supported education for all. And finally, for economics, Smith believed in a limited government and free market, and his legacy had paved the way for the creation of the classical free market theory. Now, my final insights are Adam Smith was ahead of his time. He had believed in things that were completely radical, however, are available to us humans now. I believe he's very influential. I believe his works have definitely contributed to political philosophy and moral philosophy and economics and capitalism, and his legacy will definitely live on in the history of philosophers. Finally, I'd like to say thank you for having the time and consideration for listening to this presentation, and these are my sources.